This is Dave Monk, the Prairie Monk, WEFT, Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial. And I'm by myself today, except for Kim Campbell, who's running the camera. David is in Minnesota at a funeral of his uncle, so he'll be away for a little while, and really appreciate his work on the board and hope that we can simulate that. I have one of our own passings, Jim Sternberg, entomologist par excellence. He enjoyed his life. He was an entomologist, doing a lot with Lepidoptera, which is the order that is butterflies. But he did things with Natural History Survey, was a professor and researcher and photographer. He'd created trail guides, field guides for insects, for butterflies. I remember him talking about Fritillaria, and that's one division of butterflies that's interesting. He was into things like mimicry, but when an insect mimics another, is often doing it for a purpose. So if a insect wants to simulate another insect, it might be that the second insect is poisonous. So if you look like the original insect, the poisonous one, you might be avoided by predators. Also, females that don't want to be chased too much can sometimes change their they can mimic something else, but they can't do that too much if they want to breed. He was a member of the Arctic Walton League, and he worked with prairies and the like. So he had family, most of whom are doing significant things, and belonged to St. Pat's Church, and was a stalwart there. And we say goodbye to Jim and remember him. He will be in our souls for a long time. Now, before I introduce some specific things I want to talk about, I want to suggest to you that if you have a computer nearby, that you go to it and pull up Google Earth, because later I'll be talking about Allerton Park. I've talked about it before, but I thought I'd give you some specific details, and it's very helpful for you to be able to follow through on Google Earth. So some of the things we've been dealing with, first of all, it's a very late season. We've come out of winter late, and it's meant that we almost have no opportunity to burn, because if you burn, you will, at this time, encounter green grass, and that green grass will cause smoke. But apart from that, it's late enough that the creatures and the plants have come out somewhat late. I encounter it from a horticultural point of view. I've been buying pansies for outside the WEFT in our place, and they're almost root bound because they've come into being sold rather late in the season. So that's what is happening to the native plants too. They're coming up late and then growing quickly. So very few burns this year because you don't really want to catch that retinue of animals that are there, birds and snakes and lizards and squirrels and what have you. I've been dealing with salvage. We had a almost empty salvage bin around the corner that I tend to administer, and there was a 4-gallon tank of used canola oil there, but when it was put in with a cardboard container around it, which for salvage there's a cardboard container next door that should have been taken off, but it had been injured a little bit, so it leaked, and oh my, what a mess. And then you realize why it's illegal to put oil into a dumpster. It not only makes a mess of the dumpster, but it also makes a mess of the equipment that has to handle the material on the way to Clinton or wherever. And most restaurants have a reserve can that's provided by the industry, the waste industry, that collects the oil. And that oil is picked up by people who use it for biodiesel. Tiny Greens at the farmer's market, for instance, used to run his trucks on recycled cooking oil. So I started looking around to see where I could put it. This can of oil is still sitting outside of my place on the street. Wherever you put it, it makes a mark. So I've got it sitting in a protective can, and so I thought I might be able to take it to Max Recycling because they do take oil, but unfortunately they only take motor oil. So I've been looking to restaurants who already do recycle, but many of them had a pickup on Friday, so we're not in a position to transfer it there. It's something you have to think about. If you're using cooking oil, it has to be disposed of properly. A second thing I was concerned about with salvage was that an artist either left town or changed studios, but there was a huge amount of art materials, some of them quite interesting, but a lot of plastic and included steel and a whole bunch of things that should not be in the dumpster. I would hope that artists would think better of doing that. And besides that, if it's not your dumpster, it means that the dumpster is full to the gug and doesn't have the opportunity to take other legitimate garbage without some condensation. Cardboard can go into the cardboard container, for instance. And a lot of materials could go to places like Habitat for Humanity or to the Idea Store. And so we handle those sorts of things. CCDC will have, that's a Champaign County Design and Conservation Foundation, who's been working on the rail trails at Danville. We'll be having an annual meeting on Sunday the 4th. The EBIT First starts on Wednesday the 23rd. And I think we'll start with a film about Roger Ebert himself. And I think that's what I wanted to say. Now I want to look at Allerton fairly specifically, because I have the feeling that a farmhouse that goes with Armenia, which is a rail stop on the way to Allerton Park on the back road, is in jeopardy. It's scheduled to be burned. And I want to say that there's history involved. Sam Allerton, father of Robert Allerton, was an entrepreneur in the Civil War and provided food for the troops, especially hogs. And he put in yards and in Chicago, but in other places in the East. He worked with bankers. He lived on Prairie Avenue. And this was the elite of the people who not necessarily come from wealth, but had acquired wealth and were leaders in the community. So this site at Armenia is somewhat of a national historic site. The problem some of the historians have is that Midwest has a lot of history, but it has not recorded a lot of history. Partially that is because people came sometimes from peasantry. They had to figure out how to drain the areas like Flatville. They had to survive in a forest, perhaps because it was malaria-ridden to go out in the field where there's swampland. They had to dig in the soil, make drains, and not very many people recorded this sort of activity. It takes time to record things. Sometimes if you're in a park district and you want to record what you're doing from day to day so that you can get funding for the next year, you may have to spend up to about a third of your time documenting how many phone calls, how many contacts you've made, where are the field trips, what were the events, and you have to think through them, and that takes time. So early settlers didn't have that sort of time. But there's history there, and so I want to start off by asking you to take your Google Earth and make a general view of the area between Danville and Decatur. You have to realize that Champaign County is relatively flat. It has some moraines and a few hills here and there, but it's relatively flat. The counties around, like Vermilion County and DeWitt County and Piatt County, all have interesting terrains. So Champaign County is somewhat dependent on the counties surrounding it. So we're looking at 3 or 4 counties there, and a general shot will help you to realize the center of the Piatt County area is Monticello. The center of DeWitt County is Clinton. And these should show on your Google Earth map at the moment. Later, when you have time, you may want to change from a road map to a physiological map where you see the actual landscape. If you look a little to the east, you see the terrains of Vermilion County centered around Danville, and mining and underlying faults and coal and stratas that are a different industry that makes Danville a different place. Monticello, on the other hand, was in Piatt County, and it had things like a Pepsin factory because Dr. Caldwell was aware in the early 1900s that pepsin was helpful for digesting food, whether you had diarrhea or you had constipation. Pepsin could be helpful, and that chemical has continued through to today when you have pepsin-oriented syrups that you could use for the same purpose. So Monticello had a mile of millionaires who had a unique background in that they put together a pepsin factory, squeezed the pepsin out of Seneca leaves and added some sugar and some alcohol and had an interesting syrup, Dr. Caldwell's syrup of pepsin. And so some of the State Street houses are those of the entrepreneurs that were operating the factory. The factory started with Dr. Caldwell with an apple cider press in a city storefront, and then he had quite a few entrepreneurial friends. He did not want to do the entrepreneurial thing. He had been at Monticello for a long time. A lot of people were birthed by Dr. Caldwell, and his family is still around. And one used to work with WILL, and as you go through this sort of development, you find that the factory becomes successful. The children, the next generation, get to go to universities or do interesting things. By the third and fourth generation, the factory has gone into the hands of a multinational, and the multinational pulls out those chemicals that they like to use, and then the factory dies, which happened, and the factory had degenerated some to the point that you needed $50,000 on the roof. But it's a substantial building. I spent a lot of time fighting for its existence because I felt it was a historic building. And it was eventually taken down for $1 million, and it's now a lawn. But the history is there. So Piatt County has that, and it also has Allerton Park, which was bought by Sam Allerton. Sam Allerton came from Armenia in New York and named the station that he had an elevator at Armenia. So there's that interest of forested areas, prairie areas, all along the Sangamon. If you go to, we'll talk about that later. If you go to DeWitt County, you have a serious interest at the moment because the center is Clinton, and the natural area that a lot of people go to is Clinton Power Plant Lake or Weldon Springs State Park. Both are very well used state parks. The Power Point Lake is for cooling nuclear activity for generation of electricity. And many people don't realize that we are so close to a nuclear power plant, but that's where we get quite a bit of our energy from. Underneath Clinton and Champaign, and to some extent Piatt County, not so much Danville, but coming through from that sort of area is an underground aquifer, and it is in controversy in the Clinton area at the moment because the county board invited, they have a very large dumping area for garbage. And so garbage people approached Clinton to take PVCs, polyvinyl chlorides. And these are not very friendly plastics, and chemicals that a lot of people are upset about. So there's been a lot of interest lately about what we do with PVCs, because the invite was to accept PVCs from 5 states, which almost required a railroad into the landfill to make that possible. Some of these invites were done without necessarily all the EPA controls that you might want to have. So there's a problem over there, and several counties, probably about 6 or 8 counties, are getting together to challenge that decision and to ask for the legal laws that should cover the acceptance of that particular type of chemical. The county is not a very rich county, so to have the income that comes from bringing in PVCs is considerable. So there's that debate also. At the moment it's in hold, but if you go to DeWitt County, you'll encounter not only the Clinton Power Plant Lake and the Weldon Springs State Park, but you'll also encounter this debate about a landfill which is just south of Clinton. Now, come back to Monticello, if you will, and reduce the size of, magnify your Google Earth, put Champaign at one end and put Decatur perhaps at the other. And you're going to look at the railroad bed that goes from Champaign to Seymour, to Whiteheath, to Monticello, to Cisco, and then to Decatur. It takes you a little while to waddle around here, but I would like you to do that. Heartland Pathways was aware that this line was being partially abandoned in 1990 in that general area. The line remained as a short line grain line from Seymour to Bonneville to Champaign and to meet with the Canadian National, or at that time Illinois Central Railroad. That sort of short line is often owned by the grain companies rather than by the railroads. And that's a matter of who has the money to acquire the line and what sort of other traffic is on that line. In Champaign case, you have Kraft, Humpco, and you have gravel, limestone and other gravels coming in by train just west of Prairie Gardens. There's a spur line which is not so old. It also brings in plastic for the creation of plastic goods. So there's some interest by the railroads in these short lines. The railroad technology has changed enough that these short lines haven't sorted themselves out quite yet. There's one in Rantoul that is 8 miles to Dewey, and so that was bought by the Fisher Grain and Coal Company, and they had to buy an engine of their own to take the perhaps 25 cars out to Rantoul to join up with perhaps 25 cars from Gilman or some nearby place, and then the main lines are prepared to pick up those lots and make a unit car train out of it. So they would eventually end up with perhaps 125 cars of grain going to New Orleans or elsewhere. That's typical of short lines. In the case of Monticello to Champaign, the line was cut at Seymour, so the grain goes out to Champaign from Seymour. At the other end, the grain goes from Cisco to Decatur. That's a short line owned by Top Flight Grain, and not necessarily used a lot, but available for grain. And as we see the price of gas go up, and we see the price of the demolition of the landscape with things like fracking, you know that there is a cost of comparison between trucking by truck, which is convenient, and by sending things out by rail. Rail is much cheaper. The infrastructure is expensive to start with, but it doesn't take a lot to maintain it. The safety record is high. So let's go back to Seymour now. Pull your map back into Seymour so that you see the abandoned line from Seymour. There'll be a drainage ditch there called Camp Creek. Camp Creek has about 10 square miles of area around it where it's a water catchment area. And it eventually runs into the Sangamon River at Monticello. So we start just on the east side of Camp Creek. We're called Heartland Pathways. The idea was to buy the corridor for its prairie and its potential trail, and even re-rail if that had to happen. We did this way before there was any Rail Banking Act, which suggested that be done. And the federal government now, some years after we bought, did three things. They quieted the titles so that there would be no reversionary title that would stop a trail from going through. They had sat around and watched the trail people. The burgeoning rail-to-trail movement was buying abandoned railroads that they did have some problems. One was that the bridges were removed, mandated by the federal government for the reasons of liability. So a new bridge still would have to come out. To put that new bridge back in some places cost a couple of $1 million and a lot of work. So the feds decided that they had put enough money into this activity of creating railroads in the 1850s that they could justify another public use, which was trails. It also saved the biodiversity and could come back to rails. So what they said to the rail trail movement was, we'll quiet your titles, save your bridges, and give you money. So there are now 1,500 of those trails, and they have indeed saved a lot of railroads or railroad beds. You can imagine if you were going to put in a new railroad through some of this agricultural community and also urban communities, you would have to pay a lot if you had to do that 100 years from now. So these trails more or less networked across the country. You can travel on them with a bicycle, or you can travel on the roads and use these sites, and they're interesting. So the public has gotten very pleased about it, and they, on both sides of the aisle, politically, there's a move always to keep the Rail Banking Act afloat because it is interesting, it's publicly popular. So we're starting at Seymour. In this case, it was before the Rail Banking Act, but we had the same thing in mind. that meant it was fairly innovative of us to do that. We went 4 miles, and then the Railroad Museum decided to do the same. So if you're traveling along with your Google Earth, go to Whiteheath now. And at Whiteheath there is a Y. A Y is where you can take a train. It's a triangle. You can take a train and turn it in 3 directions. You can also take a train and turn it around so that you can back up with the engine in front. In the steam era, that was important because steam trains tend to go better if they're running in the right direction instead of backwards. So at Whiteheath, if you look carefully, there is a triangle. One side of it is a Big Bend, and it is a very close bend, and one of the closest bends in the state. And when trucks move around on it, they scream because the wheels are pushing against the sides. But you can still do that. So the Railroad Museum bought that triangle, and then 7 miles of trackage down through to Monticello. So if you're following me down, go south, a little southwest, and then turn sort of west through Monticello. And there is another triangle which was at the Pepsin factory and at the grain elevator. And the Top 5 Grain is in the process of increasing the size of that elevator. They're putting in a new elevator mainly because GMO yields are higher than non-GMO yields, and they need the space for an increased harvest. That's one of the reasons why GMOs are popular. Not everyone wants a GMO. They want to know that they've got a GMO or not got a GMO. So we have to think about that. But when you get to the west side of Monticello, there's a sanitary treatment plant. But at that point, Heartland Pathways owns the railroad bed. So if you look carefully and hone in, you can see that the treatment plant with its sludge ponds, and there is a quite popular trail that goes down by the side of the treatment plant and across a trestle and across a bridge, and there is a deck across the trestle and across the bridge. It's a bridge on top of a bridge, and it goes to County Farm Road. If you're with me, that County Farm Road runs towards Allerton Park, and it's a kind of wiggly-woggly road, and I'm glad that it is a wiggly-woggly road. So now we have sold Monticello an easement for a trail, and it's an 8-feet concrete trail. That concrete trail is concrete rather than asphalt because concrete you can do yourself. Your own city people can do that. If you do asphalt, you're going to have to call in a contractor with the appropriate truck and things like that, and that means you have to do the same if you have to repair the asphalt. If a root comes up underneath it, you're going to have to bring in contractors. So a lot of trails are concrete, even though you might think that that's a little hard on the knees if you fall off your bicycle, but there's a reason for it. Heartland Pathways retains the ownership of the vegetation on either side, and we're very much in favor of this, and we would like to see some adjacent areas bought. There's some really, really nice frog ponds not too far away that we would like to see happen. Now that trail has gotten popular like the other 1,500 in the country, and the suburbs of Monticello to the west of the Sangamon River, on the mostly Allerton side, then can ride across the bridge to businesses in Monticello. And there's hiking and biking and habitat potential. We do have an interim trail use agreement on it if a railroad needs to come back in. So now look across County Farm Road and you'll see that if the Google Earth is up enough, I doubt if you'll see it, but there's an extension of a mile around to old Route 47. That's if you're coming from Champaign and peer at your Google Earth, you'll see that there's an expressway 72 which more or less parallels old Route 47. That means that old Route 47 is kind of light on traffic. There are people who run it at 70 miles an hour, but it's not nearly as dangerous as it used to be when it was a highway, and the only highway. And if you were behind a semi-trailer on that highway, it was very hard to pass the semi-trailer. Some people would do it and end up getting killed because they couldn't get in front of the semi-trailer before something came in the other direction. So this was a dangerous road, and that was the reason for putting in 72. So now that trail, it'll be hidden in the bushes on your map because I'm sure it's not updated to what has happened during the winter. It's convenient when the soil is hard to take out the vegetation that had overgrown on the trail. So now you're at Applewood, which is a recent subdevelopment. The Champaign Library is going to be there, and there's a 30-acre ballpark in the same area. And we start then with a nature trail, which we hope will be no more than 4 feet wide, so that the prairie can grow up on either side of the ballast, which is still there. There's 3 bridges that bridge little streams that drain the elevated areas to the west. They've just been repaired with walk-through sized culverts, like 6 foot high by 4 feet wide, and several of them lined up together so that the water can escape. We would not have agriculture if we didn't have that sort of escape valve. Our prairie is along the sides of the right-of-way, so you're moving now towards Wildcat Creek, which is wonderful because it has a lot of native prairie on it. And you'll see a few buildings to the right. A very new building is not going to be there, but there are gas lines that cross the railroad. These are gas lines that feed gas into Chicago and other places. But we have a railroad line which was followed by a road. The road did not come first. The railroads came first. We didn't have roads. And then the roads often parallel the railroad line. And usually there was about 5 miles between each elevator. Well, as we go along here, we have nice species. We also have a weed tree, which we're working at, and we hope the trail will go through. We might make it a one-way trail so that you don't have to do an 8-foot trail so that handlebars will pass each other. We're hoping that a one-way trail will allow a narrow trail which will allow the vegetation to come up almost onto your face. We go along, we do have endangered rattlesnakes in that area, and this is habitat for those rattlesnakes. The university starts to come in here because Allerton Park had several farms, and we're adjacent to Allerton Park in part, and the University of Illinois has owned Allerton Park since it was donated by Robert Allerton many years ago. And they have put in 1 mile by 66 feet of simulated prairie. It's only 12 species out of 100, and 6 grasses. And the grasses were sown in by planting device. The 12 species of plants were grown in Mason City and brought in by Fran Harty, who was regional director of Department of Natural Resources in this area, and then went to work with and be the land acquisition person with the Nature Conservancy. So from a state point of view and a local point of view, a state point of view and a private organization point of view, he was able to engineer 3-year-old plants. So that prairie is growing quite well. Now we're almost at Armenia. Armenia is sort of halfway between the 5-mile limit. So there's Monticello and there's Cisco. And we don't know quite whether it was Sam Allerton or Robert Allerton. We'd like to know the history. You're now at Armenia. So hone in on Armenia, and you'll see that there is an elevator. It's on Heartland Pathways territory. So you have this railroad depot, or it wasn't a depot, but it was a stopping place. And the Allerton Farms obviously had enough grain to be able to provide grain and fill its own hopper cars, which went off in whatever direction, whether it's to Monticello or to Decatur. We would like to preserve that wooden elevator as an icon of the prairie. So Google Earth will allow you to look horizontally at some of these things. So you may like to look at that elevator from the side. There are also some commodity credit bins there that hold about 3,000 gallons worth of grain. And they're there. And there are farm buildings. There are sheds for modern equipment, which are tall and don't have wooden posts in the middle. And there are sheds that are open and not so lockable and available to people who might vandalize from time to time. The one long shed there we think could be a kiosk where you could explain this sort of area. Have a look at the shed there, and then go over to the homestead. The homestead is scheduled to be burned. And we think that this is part of the national history. And we would like to ask the university to please put a hold on the fire department's burning that. One, because such buildings usually are salvaged first by PACA, which has had a long time agreement with the university to salvage the flooring, the barge boards, and various aspects of a building. But far beyond that, I would like to see that building restored rather than salvaged. If you hone in on it, you can see that it's not in the best of shape. But if we want to do things with historic buildings, there is sometimes a cost to preserve the building that's there. The Midwest historians have a concern about some of this sort of stuff because the history is not well documented for the Midwest, and this is one of those examples that they give that the history is not well documented. There have been some good publications. One of them is Robert Allerton, the private man and the public gifts, and that's a fairly recent publication that has been produced by the News Gazette. It tells you something about the family, and but there are aspects that need more research. We'd like to see that happen, and we'd like to see the building preserved. It has been vandalized some, it's been neglected some, and if I read the nearby event, another house not too far away has already been removed, and it's now agriculture. And if you know farm management for the university, it usually is that the farm managers are operating like regular farmers. They're making money for the university for scholarships and other reasons. And there's a tendency to look at this 10 or 15 acres as potential corn and soybeans. So I don't want that to happen. I want to see that complex remain. All the electrical hookups are there. There's probably a well somewhere. There's the elevator. And in order to maintain this sort of history, you need some activity, and I'm thinking that this would be an ideal site for a sustainable agricultural plot. I'm not sure whether it would be something like switchgrass for fuel or gardens. It's an area, if you're looking at your map, you'll see that Heartland Pathways owns the bed that goes right past the railroad elevator. We would like to put a hopper car there that could be filled as in the past. The elevator's obviously not ADA accessible, except on the first floor, because it goes up high, and you'd have to have a special elevator to get ADA people up there. So ADA people don't necessarily expect to go everywhere. But this is an icon. This is what you come home from when you've been out of town to California or to another country and you come home. These are the buildings you see, and they bring a tear to your eye. We need to save that building. And what might help it save is the presence of a garden. We would think that it's a little higher, which makes it a little easier to plant vegetables. The house could become a site for people getting together to find tools and things like that. There's a nice little shed, if you can see from your aerial look, that is empty, that Heartland Pathways might enjoy to put their mowers and other equipment in, so we don't have to hide them in the bushes or bring them to Bonneville to our warehouse and then back out again. So there are some cooperative things that could happen. Have to think about whether that would be, we might have to rent the site, or would this be something that the university operates? How would you have farm people do it? Because this is an educational thing that we're suggesting. The kiosk that we were suggesting with the farm machinery, a long shed. The roof is not so good, but the structure is there and the history is there. We would put some educational materials there. But the house might be a place where you wash your carrots or your potatoes, your top your flowers or what have you that you grow in a sustainable garden. We look at that and wonder if that might be a good suggestion. And I'm suggesting that you go out there and have a look at this area just to see what it's like. It's a wedge-shaped area. I would guess it's probably 30 acres. It might be 40 acres going down towards Willow Branch Creek. Willow Branch is an education in itself. If you stand on the bridge a little to the Decatur side of the elevator farm Armenia complex, you can look down Willow Branch and all the trees have been removed and the amount of erosion is tremendous. So a group that might be working with a sustainable farm might also be looking at things around them that are also historic or things that we might want to change. We might want them to experiment with perennial soybeans so that you would harvest it like alfalfa for 20 years, and you would have to have some of our sites to give you the rhizobacteria and the microorganisms that would grow on the roots of that perennial soybean. It might take 50 years to develop that soybean, but then it might help to save the runoff water, which I photographed going into the Willow Branch. Just down the road from Willow Branch, there was a site where orchestras bands probably more than orchestras, used to come in an era when there wasn't a lot of internet. There's also, not too far away, an old country club which had quite a clientele and quite some historic stories to go with it. And you go around the backside of Allerton Park. So we're looking at a rail trail that goes to Armenia. If it can't go through Armenia, it can go round Armenia. It can go up the road a little further, up the railroad bed a little further to Wildcat Creek, and then go, not Wildcat Creek, I'm sorry, to Willow Branch, and you go down Willow Branch, you pass the old historic bandstand, and then you go down and across the Sangamon River and around, and there's some prairie preservation sites there, and Bill Taylor has a site there, and so you go up by Willow Branch, past the Lost Gardens, and come round in by the Preby House, which is on the corner, and that is being used by Allerton Park now as a shell for orchestras and music, and the wolf theme that was there just recently. Dick Weaver was using it as a site where 3 buses at a time would take people there, and they would experience what it was like to be a wolf, and how you'd encounter a wolf if the wolf was out in the prairie and it attacked you. So we're looking to Monticello, who's very, very pleased that they got a bridge over the Sangamon, which has been out for 10 years. And now there's a possibility of bicycle trails. We're having some success in the area between Urbana and Danville. So it might be that this will help to demonstrate that we can do something the same with our rail trails. It's happening with the piece from the Monticello to across the Sangamon River. It's happening with the piece that goes around to the suburbs to the west of the Sangamon. And we're thinking that, or they're thinking that they want to put $25,000 into a plan, and Farnsworth Group is doing that plan, and we would like to contribute to it, and we would like you to contribute to it too if you've got a chance. So there are 3 things here on that 4 miles, 5 miles to Cisco. There's a no-mow policy, there's habitat, there's wildlife, there's some unique species. It's not the world's greatest, but it's all we have. So let's enjoy it, and then we have to interpret to the local citizens so that they know what they have nationally. This is prairie, and it's in the Grand Prairie area, and it's valuable, and it's what you may have visitors that go to Allerton to enjoy. Allerton has been farmland, and it has been forest, and we have interesting wildlife. We have herons and herons nesting, and it's wonderful. So this would be one more element to have a nature trail that is truly prairie. So we're working with trees that are weed trees like olives, and Chris Carl is leading up a group of people and starting to open up a trail between Applewood Drive, that's right near, parallel to Old Route 47, and taking that trail along to Armenia and to Willow Branch Creek. In the long run, we would hope that might go all the way to Decatur on that old Route 47, fairly modestly traveled highway. So we're also thinking that if it ever had to, we might be able to work with the piece between Whiteheath and Seymour. And then there's 23 miles to the west that goes to Clinton. And this week I had to talk to attorneys because we have some farm invasion there that is bothering. And some of you who have legal backgrounds or interests, we're looking for volunteers who can help to preserve this prairie. Well, it's getting to be the more or less the end of our session here. I hope to put this up as a visual on YouTube so that you get some of these pictures if you don't have access otherwise. So this is me, Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, and Kim Campbell on the camera, and we hope you have had or will have the remaining fancy Easter. I'm Australian in background, and we would always have a Royal Easter show, which went on for 5 days. And I used to sometimes go from my agricultural high school and supervise hogs there that will be shown for awards. A big agricultural show. So thank you for listening.